my dreams is to become a successful singer and guitarist and performers music around the world.
Every season of America's Got Talent introduces someone who captures the audience's attention for a few minutes. But every once in a while, a performer walks onto that stage already carrying years of hard work that most viewers never see. That is exactly what happened with Nene Royal. Behind the unforgettable audition is a journey that began long before the cameras started rolling. Once you discover what brought her to this moment, her performance becomes even more remarkable. The audition that broke the internet. Let me take you back to Tuesday, the 7th of July, 2026, because that is the night the whole world suddenly learned her name. She walked onto the season 21 stage of America's Got Talent, looking like the last person you would expect to command a room. She was 15 years old, soft-spoken, giggling at her own nerves, and she told the judges that the very next day she was turning 16. So the entire studio ended up singing happy birthday to a girl who had flown all the way from Phuket, Thailand, with her father standing quietly at the side of the stage to watch over her. When they asked what she wanted from life, she said she dreamed of becoming a superstar on tour. And honestly, in that moment, she sounded like a kid making a wish she did not fully believe would come true. Then she picked up the electric guitar, and the girl I just described disappeared. What replaced her was a force. She tore into a rocked-up version of the Cranberries' hit, growling, throwing her head back and pulling the crowd into the chorus like she had been doing this for 20 years instead of playing on a school stage for the first time. If you have ever been underestimated by a whole room of people who decided who you were before you opened your mouth, you already understand the quiet satisfaction of what happened next. Sofia Vergara called it spectacular and told her she had a real chance to go far. Howie Mandel simply looked at her and said she was a rock star. No qualifiers, no maybe. Mel B, who mentioned that Phuket happens to be her favorite place on earth, said the girl could genuinely kill it on the guitar and called the combination a match made in heaven. Even Simon Cowell, the man who has built a career out of crushing dreams, admitted the tone of her voice felt completely authentic and that the slightly messy edges were exactly what made the whole thing work. 4 yeses, and she was through. Yet long before those 4 strangers ever clapped for her, she had already played hundreds of nights where nobody clapped at all. The night market nobody clapped at. This is the part almost none of the American audience ever saw, and it is the part that changes how you hear everything else. Before the bright lights and the buzzers, Nene was a working street performer in her own city. And I do not mean that in some polished, made-for-television way. Every Saturday and every Sunday, from 6 in the evening until 10 at night, she set up at the Naka Night Market in Phuket town, with her guitar case open on the concrete and her amplifier running off a borrowed extension lead, and she played her heart out over the noise of sizzling woks, passing motorbikes, and tourists who were far more interested in flipping through racks of cheap vests than in listening to a teenager sing. Sit with what that actually feels like for a second, because most people never have to live it. You pour everything you have into a song, and the crowd walks straight past you as if you are furniture. Maybe one person out of 50 stops, listens for half a chorus, and then wanders off again. There is a very specific kind of loneliness in performing for people who did not choose to hear you, and there is also a very specific kind of strength that grows out of it. When you learn to hold the attention of a crowd that has every reason to ignore you, a television studio full of people who are already looking at you holds absolutely no fear. That is the secret weapon nobody at the judges' table knew she was carrying. Her own fans back home had already given her a title that told the whole truth long before America caught on, because across her channels she is known as the Angel of Rock, and her devoted followers run a fan page under the name Phuket Rockstar. The trembling, shy girl the judges met and the fearless market performer her city adored were the same person the entire time, and only one of those versions ever made it onto the broadcast. The most remarkable thing about all of it is that she reached that level without ever sitting through a single guitar lesson in her life. The girl who taught herself everything. There was no expensive teacher, no music school, no famous mentor pulling strings behind the scenes. Nene taught herself to play by ear, watching videos online and copying what she heard until her fingers finally obeyed her. And she did it through the kind of quiet, unglamorous repetition that nobody ever posts about. Her official story says she first held a guitar at 6 years old, though on the AGT stage she told the judges it was 7. And either way, she was gripping a fretboard at an age when most of us were still learning to tie our shoes. Her older channel still carries a description that jokes her fingers move faster than light, and that watching her play even once can become an addiction, which is a bold thing to say about yourself until you actually hear her do it. Here is something the zombie performance did not reveal, and it matters. That song is not the ceiling of what she can play. It is barely a warm-up. She has torn through brutal guitar monsters like Deep Purple's Burn, the kind of solo that makes seasoned professionals stop scrolling and lean toward the screen in disbelief. Her range runs from delicate, aching melodies to full-throttle rock. And that versatility is exactly why a real instrument brand, Enya Music, chose her as a featured artist while she was still a schoolgirl, an endorsement that plenty of grown musicians spend entire careers chasing and never earn. The proof of how much that talent connected is sitting right there in the numbers, because her following climbed past 800,000 on Facebook alone and stretched beyond 3 million people, once you add every platform together. Those are not vanity figures, they are the sound of a global audience quietly gathering around a kid from a small island long before the mainstream ever looked her way. And what gets me is that she built all of it in private, alone in a room, learning from a phone screen, with nobody promising her it would ever pay off. Back home in Thailand, that lonely practice had already turned into a shelf of trophies that the judges on that famous night never got to hear a single word about. The trophies America never heard about. The narrative that spread online painted her as a magical unknown who appeared out of nowhere, and it is a lovely story, but it simply is not true. Thailand had been watching this girl climb for years. On the 28th of October, 2023, she placed second at the Overdrive Guitar Contest, a competition so respected in the country that it carries its own nickname, the Guitar Battle. And the judges there praised her for playing at a professional level while she was still just a child. Then, on the 27th of September, 2025, she was named an outstanding player at the King Power Band competition. Another serious recognition of her as a live performer rather than an online novelty. She had also already stepped in front of the cameras on the well-known Thai television program Super 10, sharing a stage with established professional artists at an age when most kids are too shy to sing at a family party. So by the time she boarded a plane to the United States, she was not some wide-eyed beginner hoping for her very first taste of a spotlight. She was a decorated, tested, quietly celebrated musician walking onto a bigger stage than any she had stood on before, carrying years of pressure and preparation that the audience mistook for beginner's luck. I think that gap between how the world saw her and who she actually was is the real heart of this whole story. And it is something a lot of us feel in our own lives. You work in the shadows for years. You build something real that almost nobody notices. And then one loud moment arrives, and strangers act as if you were born the day they discovered you. Nene wore that quiet frustration with more grace than most adults ever could, and she let the music do the arguing for her. There is one detail, though, that even her biggest fans back home may not have fully understood, and it hides inside the very song she chose to sing. The anthem she carried onto that stage was born out of a real tragedy, and almost nobody in that cheering crowd had the faintest idea what it was truly about. The dark truth behind the song she chose. To understand why her choice is so haunting, you have to know where Zombie actually comes from, because it is one of the heaviest protest songs in modern music history. It was written by Dolores O'Riordan of the Irish band The Cranberries and released in 1994. And it was not written to entertain anybody. It was written in grief and fury after a real atrocity. On the 20th of March 1993, the IRA hid 2 bombs inside cast-iron litter bins in the English town of Warrington. And when they exploded, they killed 2 children, a 3-year-old boy named Jonathan Ball and a 12-year-old boy named Tim Perry, and wounded more than 50 other people. O'Riordan was a young woman herself, out on tour, when the news reached her, and the horror of it never let go of her. She poured her anger into a song that refused to accept violence as normal, and she made it painfully personal, insisting that this bloodshed was not being carried out in her name or in the name of ordinary Irish people. When people assumed she supported the paramilitaries simply because she was Irish, she pushed back hard, saying plainly that the IRA were not her, that she was not the IRA, and that her family had nothing to do with any of it. The song even reaches back to 1916 and the Easter Rising, treating the fighting as an old sickness that keeps repeating itself while children pay the price. Now, hold that heaviness in your mind and place it beside the scene we started with. A smiling teenager, one single day away from turning 16, stood on a glittering entertainment stage and threw her whole body into an anthem soaked in death, protest, and a mother's shattered heart. And the vast majority of that clapping, cheering crowd had no idea they were hearing a cry against terrorism. Whether Nene fully carried the weight of every word or simply felt its raw power in her bones, there is something quietly powerful about a young voice from one side of the world lifting up a young woman's protest from another. 2 teenagers, decades apart, refusing to stay silent. What makes the timing almost eerie is that her version arrived at the exact moment the song's original creators were pulling that very anthem back into the light of day. The song that refuses to die. Zombie has a strange habit of coming back to life, again and again, long after everyone assumes its moment has passed. When Dolores O'Riordan died unexpectedly in 2018, many assumed the song would become little more than a cherished classic, remembered by longtime fans, but slowly fading from the cultural conversation. The opposite happened. Instead of fading away, Zombie grew into something even larger than it had been during its original release. It became a stadium anthem, echoing through arenas as Irish rugby supporters sang every word with remarkable emotion during major international tournaments. Online, it crossed the extraordinary milestone of 1 billion streams and views across platforms, placing it among a tiny group of rock songs that continue reaching audiences decades after they were first released. Most artists spend entire careers hoping for that kind of legacy. Zombie achieved it by continuing to speak to people long after its creator was gone. The song also found new life through reinterpretation. Bad Wolves recorded a powerful cover that introduced Zombie to millions of younger listeners who had never experienced the original. While the version generated discussion and controversy, it also reminded the world how timeless the song's message remained. Perhaps the most moving response came from Colin Perry, whose 12-year-old son Tim was killed in the 1993 Warrington bombing that inspired Dolores O'Riordan to write the song in the first place. Rather than seeing Zombie as an exploitation of tragedy, Perry described it as majestic and deeply truthful, saying it transformed unimaginable grief into something that encouraged remembrance rather than silence. For a father who had endured such devastating loss, those words carried enormous weight and underscored why the song has endured for so long. Then came one of those extraordinary coincidences that feels almost too perfect to be real. Just as Nene's breathtaking audition was spreading across social media and introducing millions of people to her voice, The Cranberries announced the first official release of a previously unheard concert recording, Live at London Astoria II, 1994, scheduled for release on August 28th. Among its highlights was a live performance of Zombie itself. Suddenly, two completely separate stories began unfolding at exactly the same moment. On one side of the world, an Irish band was preparing to share a newly restored performance recorded more than 3 decades earlier. On the other, a teenage street musician from the night markets of Phuket had unknowingly reignited global interest in the very same song through a single unforgettable performance. They were separated by thousands of miles, different cultures, and more than 30 years of history. Yet they found themselves connected by the same piece of music at exactly the same point in time. That is what makes Zombie so remarkable. It has outlived its creator, crossed languages, cultures, and generations, and continues finding new voices willing to carry its message forward. Every artist who performs it becomes part of a chain stretching back to Dolores O'Riordan herself, adding another chapter to a story that refuses to end. Nene is now the newest link in that chain. Even if she never imagined she was stepping into such extraordinary company, there is something deeply moving about the idea that a protest song born from one nation's heartbreak could travel halfway across the world, reach a young singer who grew up in a completely different culture, and still strike listeners with exactly the same emotional force. That kind of connection cannot be manufactured. It only happens when music speaks to something universal. Yet, as powerful as that single performance was, what Nene chooses to do once the applause finally fades is where her real story is only just beginning. What she does next. The audition was never meant to be the finish line, and she is treating it exactly that way. Those 4 yeses sent her through to the next round of the competition, and while the show has not yet revealed how far she will ultimately go, she is still very much in the running, still one step closer to that touring superstar dream she whispered about on stage. More importantly, she is not sitting around waiting for the internet to decide her fate. Away from the cameras, she has been writing and recording her own original material, and she is preparing a debut EP that is expected to arrive this summer, which quietly marks her biggest evolution yet. The leap from a girl who plays other people's songs into an artist creating her own. When you line the whole journey up, it lands with real weight. A child taught herself guitar from a screen, played for years to crowds that walked past her at a night market, collected trophies almost nobody outside Thailand ever heard about, and then carried one of rock's most serious protest songs onto a world stage with her father watching proudly from the wings, exactly the way he had probably watched her 1,000 times before, in far humbler places. The trembling, shy girl and the fearless angel of rock were never two different people at all. They were one story the whole time, and if I am reading this right, we are only about halfway through it. If you had told the little girl busking over the sound of motorbikes that 4 global icons would one day rise to their feet for her, she might not have believed you. And that is exactly why her story deserves to be watched all the way to wherever it goes next. So here is what I actually want to know from you. Do you think Nene Royal has what it takes to win the entire competition? Or is her biggest moment still hiding somewhere ahead of her? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments below, because I read every single one, and I genuinely want to hear where you stand.